Hello guys, you are listening to Gentlemanly. I am Troy Francis, the author of 11 books and mentor to thousands of men all over the planet, from London to Warsaw to Bogota to Mexico City and back again. This podcast isn't about pickup, it's about presence. It's about seduction, philosophy, style, and the mythic art of remaining dangerous long after most men fade. So let's get into it. So today we are on episode 3, which is called What I Got Wrong About Women. So if you watched or listened to the last episode, you'll know I share quite deeply about a mistake or some mistakes that I made when I was a much younger guy in my very early 20s. I mean, barely into my 20s really, that I didn't make again afterwards for obvious reasons. But I want to talk a bit more generally now about some of the sort of things that I picked up about male-female dynamics along the way. And really, a lot of this stuff is about breaking old beliefs and old belief patterns, because mainstream society tends to teach us to behave in a certain way, and increasingly so because of the way that politics are going in the West and in the Anglosphere at least. And listen, not entirely a bad thing, okay? Not entirely a bad thing, but it does make the job of being a guy a bit more difficult, I would say. Women have problems as well. It's not all plain sailing for females, so let's not pretend this is a one-sided thing. But men do have specific problems in terms of how to act and, how to behave with women that we are attracted to and we'd like to make something happen with. And I think that's why the dating coaching industry, as maligned as it is, continues to get bigger and more profitable year on year, because more and more guys are just bamboozled by this current dating malaise that we all find ourselves in. Particularly older guys, maybe guys who've been married for a period of time and then they've come out of that and they're rejoining the dating scene, and they're finding things to be very different from how they were maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So a lot of it is about breaking old habits, and a lot of this stuff is sort of counterintuitive, if that makes sense. And we're not taught this stuff. We're not taught this stuff in schools. Now, people will often say, well, we don't have strong fathers, so we don't have fathers to teach us this stuff. But I'm unconvinced that fathers ever really taught this stuff, to be honest. I mean, I certainly, if I look at my parental lineage, my grandfather was very remote, really, from my father. And his father was even more remote from my grandfather. Now, my father, because we're talking into the 80s, really, 70s, 80s, my father was much more on hand, hands on deck with me, and, much more sort of emotionally connected with me, because that was the way the tide was turning. But even still, we didn't sit down and have a conversation about, how to behave with women or anything like that. And times have changed. Times have changed. So even if we had have had that conversation, which would have felt very awkward and out of character for him and for me, the advice he would have given me would probably not have been advice that would have stood up to any scrutiny in the modern world, and certainly not in 2025. And, prior to that, I don't think fathers really gave advice at all. You could argue they gave guidance through example, I suppose. You could argue, they were the man of the house, they were the breadwinner, if you want to buy into that sort of patriarchal idea. Although, make no mistake, cheating was rife back in the day. Women weren't these angelic sweet creatures who baked cakes during the daytime and served them up to the husband. There was a lot of marital unhappiness even back in the 1950s or whatever. So, dispel all of those romantic myths that you might have. But you could argue, I guess, at a pinch, that men demonstrated what it was to be masculine to their children before, and perhaps they do that less now. Maybe you could make that argument. But I don't think there was ever seriously a time when men sat down and taught their sons how to into, how to go and chat up girls. I just don't think it's ever happened, or it's probably happened, but in a minority of cases, right, with relatively eccentric fathers. So, we're not taught this stuff. There's no school, and increasingly, obviously, there's no school curriculum which is going to teach this stuff. So how do you change? How do you evolve? Well, for me, my story it's almost broken into, I think, 3 parts. I might modify that as we go into this, but I think there were broadly 3 phases. The first phase was utter hopelessness. Okay, so the first phase was me being at school and really fancying certain girls at school and putting them on a pedestal, and inevitably them not liking me back. Okay, now, as I've expressed in a previous episode, there were actually girls who liked me along that journey. I did actually get quite a number of girls who expressed interest in me and did want to date me and so on and so forth. But because I was a romantic fool, which I remain to this day, not quite to the same degree, I basically pushed those women aside and held out for the ones that I really fancied. It was Jane in the biology class or Susan in history or whatever. And I would do the classic horrific mistake that most men make, which is try to befriend them and hope that magically something would just end up happening, which of course it never did. And inevitably in the end, they'd just go on and date somebody else and I'd be bereft and whatever. In the meantime, there were other girls who were, attractive and who were interested in me, who I just ignored or pushed to the sidelines because I was worried that it would endanger whatever chances I thought I had with the main girl. Now, obviously, that was nonsense because I didn't have any chances with these main girls anyway. And secondly, if anything, a little bit of jealousy put into the equation might have helped my cause. Who knows, So, again, counterintuitive, right? Because I thought at that time, and this is, teenage years, so 15, 16, 17, 18, whatever, I thought the way to win a girl's affection is to be steadfastly loyal to that girl, even when you're not in a relationship with her, even when you're not getting anything back. You don't want to be seen to be talking to other girls or engaging other girls, because otherwise you might upset the main girl that you're angling for. That was a mistake. That was something that I got wrong, because actually, for a start, if somebody's not showing you interest in the initial stages, or certainly after a little while, you've given it a go and there's no initial interest coming through, you need to move on. And you might as well move on to women who are sufficiently attractive and also there's a glimmer of interest there from them. Okay, and this is what we teach clients now. Dr. Robert Glover, who wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy, but also wrote a book called Dating Essentials for Men, he talks about this. He talks about testing for interest, testing for high interest versus low interest. So he basically says, go out, be super social, talk to everybody, talk to loads of different women, and just gauge the response that you get, right? Are you getting a good response? Okay, fine. Carry on the conversation. Maybe try and ask for a phone number or whatever. If you get a cold or a frosty reception, or, she's a bit offhand with you, fine. Just, jettison that and move on to somebody else. Simple as that. If I'd have learned that when I was 17 instead of 45, then my life probably would have been very different, There's a concept that gets talked about a lot in the men's space, which is one-itis, which I think is, I've got a bit of a problem. I mean, I've got a bit of a problem with pretty much all the terminology that gets used in this space, really, because I think, isn't another word for one-itis just love? I mean, isn't, you get married to somebody, it's like, oh my God, he's got one-itis for her. Well, yeah, I mean, like, they chose to get married, so obviously he's going to be into her. But my take on one-iters was always more about unrequited love. So you would have a fixation on a woman who just wasn't interested in you. You weren't getting anything back, and you were still obsessed with her. Okay, and so I would fall into what you might call one-iters quite frequently, and that was again a very bad mistake, because there's just no point. I mean, game is played with women who at least show some degree of interest, okay? And a lot of the time, game is about not messing up, right? Or seduction is about not messing up, okay? But you cannot seduce a woman who is just diametrically opposed to being with you, who just has zero interest in you whatsoever. It just can't be done, right? And anybody who thinks that it can is a buffoon, or is trying to sell you something, or just doesn't know what they're talking about. It just can't be done. It's just not possible, right? I mean, you know, you're not her type. She's just not into you, right? So it doesn't matter how clever your lines are, or what you say, or how interesting your stories are, or whatever. If she's just into a totally different sort of genre of guy than you are, then you know, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's just it. And you just have to accept that. But the way that you accept that is by recognizing intellectually and then practically that there are millions and billions of different options out there, okay? You know, it's not like there's just this one woman, and if you don't obtain her affections, then you're going to be like a man in the desert for the rest of your life. It just doesn't work like that, right? I mean, you know, think about all these dudes who just go on a plane to Thailand, right? I mean, you know, there's someone for everyone out there, even if you're a pot-bellied, balding, horrifically dressed, late middle-aged American dude, right? I mean, you're still gonna, you know, get on that plane. You're still gonna find somebody, all right? So I think avoiding one-iters, avoiding fixation on people that are just not into you is the first thing. And it's a very, very simple message, but it's one that needs to be reiterated, I think, because we still encounter guys, even now, who just don't really get that, or they're holding out hope that, oh, if I do this or I do that, she's going to like me, and that's just not how it works. I mean, in general, attraction works very quickly, you know? In general, from the first conversation, if there's something there, you should be able to tell. And it can be subtle, you know, it's subtle cues. It's like her eye contact, the way she's responding, the way she's laughing at your jokes, the way she's maybe asking you questions, and just these little things. You should get a sense of interest, as opposed to somebody, and you walk up to her and say, oh, you know, you look really nice. I just wanted to come and say hello. And she's like, oh, okay, thanks. And then just starts looking at her phone. Well, obviously, that's low interest. And Robert Glover, by the way, posits that there is only high interest versus low interest. Okay? I personally believe there is a bit of a middle ground, but let's put that to one side because that's getting a bit advanced. Let's just say there's low interest and there's high interest. So high interest is you walk up and you're like, hey, you look really nice. I wanted to come and say hi. She's like, oh my God, that's so nice of you. Wow, where are you from? Are you from Argentina? No, I'm just visiting. What about you? Yeah, I'm from Buenos Aires, blah, blah, blah. You know, she makes it very easy for you. That is high interest, okay? If you go over and you say, hey, you look really nice, I had to come and say hello. And she says, oh, cool, thanks, but I got a boyfriend. That is low interest. Now, you can argue the toss about, does she actually have a boyfriend? Is that true? Is she capping? Is it untrue? Whatever. But the very fact that she said it, she's put a roadblock in the way, means that it's low interest. Because if it was high interest, she would make it easy for you, okay? Or easier for you. So one of the first things, or one of the very fundamental key things that I learned along the way was to go for, I don't want to say easy targets, because you can still mess it up. Even if a girl's into you, believe me, you can still mess it up, because I've messed it up many, many times with women who ostensibly were into me at the beginning. And you can do that by being boring, or not really leading on the date, or being too needy, or just, you know, having a shit conversation, or saying something that puts her off, or whatever. You know, there's lots of things you can do to mess it up. And part of what we teach is effectively not messing it up, right? But there's no point in pursuing people that just aren't interested in you in the first place, right? Because you're just not going to convert those people, okay? So that's one thing. And I think Torero used to talk about, I forget the precise percentages, but it was something like, you know, say it was 40, let's just make this up. Let's say it was 40% are just not interested in you, okay? 40% of women, they're just not available, they're not interested, you're not their type, they're not feeling it, they're in a bad mood, whatever. They're just not available, okay? And anything you do is not going to work. 30% are... No, actually, no, it's less than that, isn't it? It's less than that. Let's say 20%, let's say, and that's being generous, are actually just into you. They just really like you, okay? They like the way you look, they like the way you dress, they like your vibe, they like your riz, whatever it is, okay? And those are the ones where less game is required and it's more about not messing it up. And then you've got, what are we on now? What did I say? Did I say 40% for the first one? I think I did. So then say we've got another 40%, which are the ones who are in the middle. Okay? The ones who are sort of, yeah, he's all right, but I need a bit more, you know, let's see. I need a bit more convincing. I'm not sure about this guy, blah, blah, blah. And again, this is where the game is played, because those girls are, or those women are, you know, you can charm them. You can be charming, you can be witty, you can be debonair, you can be dashing, you can be a little bit mysterious, and you can potentially ignite the fires of interest in those women in a way that, you know, you're just not going to be able to do with the ones who are a straight no. Okay? So if you think about it broadly in those three categories, I just made the percentages up there, but you know what I'm saying. There's a small group at the top who genuinely like you, and if you go out enough and you talk to enough people, you will meet them. There's a larger group who are just not into it at all, and then there's a group in the middle who, yeah, maybe, if you do things right, possibly she could be talked around. And so it's the latter two groups that are the ones that you should concentrate on, rather than the ones who just definitely aren't interested, you know. What did I used to believe when I started to learn about this stuff? So again, as I was saying before, there are sort of three broad stages to my development in this area. The first one was complete and utter hopelessness and virginity as a teenager. The second was a combination of delusional self-confidence and flamboyance, plus doing a lot of approaching, but still not really knowing what I was doing, but at least I was taking a lot of action, okay? So that was the second phase. And then the third phase was starting to read things like The Game and seeing that there was, and other books about evolutionary psychology and stuff, and recognizing that there was a bit of a pattern to this, that there were certain things that you could do that would help you and certain things you could do that would hinder you, okay? So I suppose what I used to believe in the first place was very much based on Hollywood movies and rom-coms and things that I used to watch on TV at the time. Now, it's ironic because my family background was pretty screwed up. So it wasn't like I came from this wonderfully happy family and had this amazing, you know, experience of family and relationships and the great examples that appeared before me, because it just wasn't really like that. So in a way, I should have known better, but somehow the programming of mainstream media got in my head, and I believed all the stories about, oh, you know, the nice guy finishes last, but he gets the girl in the end, and blah, blah, blah. And that was pretty rudely dispelled for me when I got into, you know, high school or whatever you call it, and the girls that I really liked, the seemingly very nice and innocent and pretty girls that I liked, would go off with the school bad boy or whatever, and I was like, what the hell? You know, I just don't get it. And so that was the first thing that I used to believe that turned out to be incorrect. Okay, and I started to understand female psychology somewhat more. And I mean, an example of that is a girl I won't give her a real name, but let's just say she was called Elizabeth, who I really liked when I was in secondary school. I think we were in English class together, and I really liked her, and we sort of became friends, and she liked me too, but she didn't really like me romantically, and then she ended up just dating some, the school Chad, basically, this is whatever you want to call it, the school sort of some guy who was good at sports and, pretty muscular and all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, if anyone's seen the film Crimes and Misdemeanors by Woody Allen, it's like Woody Allen's disbelief that Mia Farrow can go off with Alan Alda. Because it's like, but he's so uncultured. He's so not like me. I'm this sensitive kind of like artistic kind of soul, and she's got off with him, and he just can't comprehend it. And it was similar with me. I just couldn't comprehend. I was like, why? Whereas actually the answer was obvious, right? She was a feminine woman. This was a masculine guy, an archetypally sort of masculine dude. Of course she was going to be attracted to him. I was a flannel who was trying to get with her through friendship. So I suppose that was another learning, which was that the route of trying to be friends first and hoping that something happens was a route to nowhere. And that actually was my strategy for a long time. It was basically like, right, I'm going to just be friends with her. And I don't know what I expected. I think I just thought something would happen, right? Somehow magically she would turn around and realize, oh my God, Troy, he's amazing. And then we'd get together and it would all be like a wonderland. And what I didn't realize at that point was that also I needed to step up to the plate. I needed to step up to the plate, and I needed to lead it. If anything was going to happen, as the guy, the onus was on me to lead it. So that was another thing that I didn't realize and I had to learn. And then when I learned about, I hate using the word game, but you know what I'm saying. When I learned that there was a skill set here that could be applied, there was something that could be somewhat replicated and used time and again. Tailored to the individual, of course, but you know what I'm saying. Did I believe that lines and tactics worked? Possibly for a short period of time, because there was a lot of stuff online. So the problem is when you come to this, or you come to a subject area like this, there's a lot of information out there online, and you tend to believe what you read. So I was reading a lot of slightly cheesy, like American type stuff online, and there are all these scripted stories people would tell and stuff like that, and I try and memorize them, and I think, oh, this is going to work because it's showing off my, I forget what Mystery calls it in the Mystery Method, but the sort of the alpha tells, the attractiveness triggers that women buy into, protect leader of men, protector, provider, whatever they are. And you'd be encouraged to tell these stories that showcase these individual things, like, oh, there was this puppy was drowning in a river, so I dived in and went and saved the puppy or something. You know what I mean? Like to demonstrate certain characteristics about you. And I would do that kind of stuff for a while. I was never very good at scripted or sort of game that was too pre-planned, because my memory's always been shot, probably from too much naughty substance abuse when I was younger, so I was never really able to remember the routines or the stories very well, but I would try it. And actually, it did work to some extent, but in hindsight, what I started to realize was that I think it was working just because I was standing in front of enough women and talking and saying something. And sometimes I think the women liked me in spite of the nonsensical game that I was spitting. It was almost like the game was a hindrance, or at least was neutral, was an irrelevance. And what they actually liked was just me or my energy. Okay, and that brings me on to the next bit, really, which is what actually works, which is presence, leadership, and a sense of masculine groundedness when you're in an interaction. So we talk a lot about day game here, but I mean, this could apply to the nighttime as well. It doesn't really matter. It's just any situation where there's a woman, you're standing in front of each other, you're having a conversation, right? The thing that's actually going to turn the dial is not so much what you say or what you talk about. The thing that's going to turn the dial is the energy that you transmit and that she feels when she's in your presence. Now, this unfortunately starts to sound a bit woo-woo and it's a little bit intangible, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it's really, really true, okay? And I suppose the best way of putting it is, well, the words that I just used, which were presence, leadership, and masculine groundedness, okay? So you want to be standing in front of the woman and having that conversation, strong eye contact, unwavering confidence, and being the one who's leading it, you know? And those are the things really, it doesn't really matter what you're talking about. Strong eye contact, I think I mentioned, but that too, extremely important. And if you can maintain strong, somewhat suggestive eye contact, that can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, okay? And you don't really need a lot else other than that, to be honest. I mean, you can have a pretty banal conversation about the price of eggs, and if you're standing in close proximity and she can feel that sort of man to woman undertone and the eye contact is strong, that does a lot of the work for you. It really, really does. So another thing that I got wrong about women, or something that I learned, was that it had to be this very carefully scripted dance, and it was all about the verbals, right? And back in the day, I'm talking about sort of 2012, that kind of time, or even earlier, you know, there was a lot of preference. There was a lot of importance placed on the verbals and what you said and the routines that you used and the lines that you used and everything else. And what we discovered pretty quickly was that actually a lot of that stuff was complete nonsense, and you could charge around a club and just talk complete bollocks, as the English like to say, to women. But if your energy was on point, then they would still buy into it nevertheless. The main thing is to be approaching, to be talking to enough people and having positive energy. And when I say positive energy, I'm not saying you have to go around and be a clown and laughing the whole time, but just having a sort of sense of joie de vivre about you, you know, an infectious energy, okay? Which could be a little bit sarcastic, it could even be a little bit, I don't want to say negative, but you know what I mean? It's not about being a clown or a joker, but it's about just having that energy, having that masculine presence. That's the thing that really turns the dial. Again, this is a bit nuanced, and it's hard to kind of get across in a video or a podcast like this, but it really, really is true. And the longer that I've studied this stuff and the longer that I've taught this stuff, the more I've realized how true it is, because we will get guys who will come out to work with us on a boot camp, and they know some of the stuff to say, right? They've got lines that they've learned from some textbook that was written in 2015 or something, and they're like, okay, right, I'm going to say that, and this is going to get the goal. And they say it, but there's no conviction there. And this brings me on to the next point, which is the importance of conviction, or at least of putting it on the line when you go in, okay? So when you're doing that approach, because women respond to real energy versus performance, okay? And a lot of the game stuff that was taught back in the day was performative, okay? It was sort of say these things because these things are going to make you sound like, in inverted commas, an alpha male, or these things are going to make you sound like the kind of guy that she's going to want to be with. And actually what we learned over the last decade or so is that, firstly, you have to actually become the kind of man that she wants to be with, because in the age of Instagram, you can't really hide anywhere. You know, you've got to kind of become that guy, or at least work on becoming that guy. But secondly, it's about the energy that you convey. It's about the manner in which it's conveyed rather than what is said, okay? You could say pretty much anything. You could read out a shopping list to a woman, but if the energy is correct, then it's going to have legs. It's going to, you know, something can happen. And I know this, and the reason I know this is because when you interact, if you interact with foreign women who speak very little English, right? Yes, you can use a little bit of Google Translate, but if the energy between the two of you is right, if the man to woman-ness is correctly constructed, then she's going to get it. and she will likely, give you her phone number, and then things will go from there. So, again, it's I suppose one of the learnings that I had was thinking that this was some kind of science where it was almost like trying to crack the Enigma code. You had to say exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, and if you didn't, it was going to all go wrong and everything. And so much of it actually is based on vibe and energy, which is hard to teach. Hard to teach over video. It's easier to teach in person when we do in-person coaching, which I do. And, if you're interested in that, obviously just email me, troy@realtroyfrancis.com. But you need to shift from being the performer to being the guy that actually embodies it, okay? You need to shift from being the performer to being the guy who actually embodies masculinity and man to woman energy, all right? Easier said than done. Some of the things we recommend, looking at your hormones, okay? A lot of guys that we work with turn out to be low T. That's going to have an effect, okay? Getting enough sleep. I mean, doing all the testosterone enhancing things short of TRT. I mean, you can do TRT if you want, but short of that, making sure you get enough sleep, getting out into the sunshine, eating the right things, going to the gym, all this kind of stuff, looking as good as you possibly can. Practicing being playful, okay? But not a clown. And you can start to do that. Start to make little jokes, but not jokes like a stand-up comedian. Just little things, teasing her a little bit, saying little things that are a little bit cheeky. If you start to do that, and you've got good, strong eye contact with her, and there's a sub-communication going on there that implies that you want to get to know her on an intimate level, that's going to get you a lot further than memorizing a bunch of lines off the internet, which, are just going to seem lame. And at best, if they do work, they're going to work in spite of the fact that you've used them rather than because of the fact that you've used them. They're going to work because she's like, okay, well, this guy came and said a load of weird stuff to me, but I still quite like him anyway, so I'll give him a chance. I think that's enough for today. I hope you got something from that. This gets quite nuanced. And as I say, it's always easier to teach this stuff in person. But what the fundamental thing that I got wrong about women was that it was this huge mystery, and that you had to learn an encyclopedia's worth of conversational gambits and ideas and things to say in order to be successful, when actually what you need to do, because the girl is looking for that guy, right? What do I mean by that guy? That guy who gets it, that guy who is comfortable in his skin, who's a genuine masculine dude who, knows what he's doing, can take control, has leadership qualities, is kind but not a pushover, not a nice guy, has boundaries, all right? And the more that you can, A, embody that guy when you communicate with her, and B, actually be that guy, the better you're going to do, all right? But there'll be more on this in episodes coming up. I don't want to overdo it this time. That's probably enough for today, but I hope that you got something from that. You understand where I'm coming from. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please share it with a friend. If you want to reach out to me to discuss anything, you can leave comments below, or just email me, troy@realtroyfrancis.com, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye-bye.